This episode of Rhizome is brought to you in part by the Synthesis Security Group and Fuzzy Wuzzy Signal Processing, a venture of Ian Swanke. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking something absolutely wild, and honestly, a little bit dark. We're talking about the hidden costs of achieving total mastery through absolute chaos. It's a deep dive into what actually happens when someone completely bypasses the traditional rules of self-preservation and literally treats their own life as fuel. How exactly does chaos burn the vessel? Let's get into it. Picture this. It's season 12 of The Ultimate Fighter. A guy named Jean Charles Skarbowsky casually strolls onto the set. Now, he's completely hungover, he reeks of stale alcohol, and he hasn't slept. He steps onto the mats with a bunch of young, heavily conditioned, top-tier professional MMA prospects, and he absolutely effortlessly dismantles them. It was wild. One of those stunned young fighters completely summed up the bewilderment in the room when he said, "That guy's brutal. He beat us all up and he was drunk." Section 1. The Drunken Master of MMA and the Tough 12 Paradigm Shift. So how on earth did this even happen? Well, Georges St-Pierre, the legendary GSP, actually brought Skarbowsky into the gym. Now, GSP is famous for his almost robotic, monastic discipline, yet he brings in his close friend Skarbowsky, calling him a free thinker. Skarbowsky wasn't just some guy, by the way. He was a legendary French Muay Thai striker who had literally reached the absolute pinnacle of the sport, becoming the #1 contender at Thailand's extremely prestigious Rajadamnern Stadium. But the culture shock for these young fighters was massive. Think about it. Modern athletic prep is practically a science, right? It's all about perfectly balanced macros, exactly 8 hours of deep sleep, and highly specific warm-ups. And Skarbowsky just bypassed the whole shebang. The fighters noticed he was running on maybe 3 hours of sleep a night. But the second the sparring started, his technique was flawlessly devastating. He wasn't just surviving out there, he was dominating. Moving to Section 2. Two Paths of the Warrior. The Temple versus the Transgressor. You see, this hilarious, incredibly chaotic reality TV moment actually breaks open a really deep philosophical truth. It highlights two fundamentally different ways human beings attempt to achieve greatness. When we break it down, there is a massive contrast here. The dominant narrative in basically all of sports is the right-hand path, the ascetic. GSP is the ultimate poster child for this. Strict discipline, sleep hygiene, dialed-in nutrition. The goal is mastery through purification, treating your body like a literal temple. But on the flip side, you have the left-hand path, the transgressor. This is Skarbowsky. This path embraces taboo. It leans into altered states, and it actually utilizes chaos. The goal isn't purity. It's mastery through the integration of the whole chaotic self. Now, the core of this left-hand path isn't about being some malicious or evil person. People actually say Skarbowsky is an incredibly warm and generous guy. What it's really about is uncompromising personal sovereignty. It's the radical idea that your will and your power are inherent to you alone. You're not relying on strict athletic dogma. Instead of suppressing your vices to reach some perfectly sterile ideal, you're dragging those demons right onto the canvas and fighting with them. Which leads us to a fascinating concept: internalized mastery. If your craft only works when conditions are absolutely 100% perfect, when you're fully rested, fed, and totally warmed up, well, maybe your mastery is actually kind of fragile. Skarbowsky's skill is so deeply woven into his raw nervous system that it operates flawlessly even when his conscious, rational mind is quite literally poisoned by exhaustion and alcohol. All right, Section 3, the poison is the medicine, and Zui Quan mirrors. To truly grasp how this chaos mechanically functions in a fight, we can look at a perfect cinematic parallel. I'm talking about Jackie Chan's legendary performance in Drunken Master 2. In the movie, Jackie Chan's character practices Zui Quan, or drunken boxing. It's a Chinese martial arts philosophy that takes the concept of using chaos to defeat order and makes it entirely literal. In the story, his father represents the strict right-hand path. Alcohol is a moral hazard. But for the Drunken Master, the poison literally becomes the medicine. By impairing his rigid, conscious mind, he bypasses all his inhibitions, ignores pain, and hits a transcendent flow state. He turns a taboo substance into raw power. And the crazy thing is, this isn't just movie magic. It ties directly into a very real, very high-level martial arts concept called Mushin, or no mind. It's about the total elimination of telegraphing. A sober, rigid fighter thinks too much. They tense up, they plan out their combinations. But a drunken fighter moves without a fixed center. They're constantly in a state of almost falling. When Skarbowsky was sparring on that show, his hands were low, his shoulders were incredibly loose, and he honestly looked kind of lazy. But that relaxation was so absolute that his strikes were landing before his opponent's brains could even process the threat. But here is the massive catch. The line between being a stumbling fool and a deadly master is razor thin. You cannot just drink a 12-pack and expect to become a martial arts god. Walking this chaotic path requires a freakish, almost superhuman level of native talent just to survive it. That is exactly why GSP explicitly warned his fighters not to try and copy his friend's lifestyle. Most people who try this just end up destroying themselves. Which brings us to our final section, how chaos burns the vessel and the Faustian math of mastery. This is where we have to talk about the devastating transactional math required when you bypass traditional discipline. Because let's be real, the dark side does not give out free power.
It all comes down to the architecture of the self. The right-hand path protects the body like a temple. It's cautious. It builds a sturdy foundation so you can safely hold power over a long lifetime. The left-hand path? It treats the self like a furnace. It uses vices as wild accelerants to entirely bypass normal human limitations. It produces immense raw energy, absolutely, but it does so by burning the very walls that contain the fire.
Think of it like taking the governor off an engine. Sure, it's going to run way faster than it was ever designed to, but eventually, the metal itself melts. This whole approach operates on a really high interest loan, and the collateral is always the vessel itself. You are making a trade-off, trading longevity for one blindingly brilliant peak of intensity. When you refuse the protective scaffolding of external rules, like normal sleep and nutrition, you have to generate all of your own gravity. And eventually, the world extracts a heavy, threefold tax. First, physical wear. The human body just can't survive indefinitely on 3 hours of sleep and high-impact trauma. The bill always comes due in the nervous system. Second, loss of control. The very poison you use to free your mind eventually turns around and becomes the master. And third, isolation. When you play entirely by your own chaotic rules, nobody else can follow you. The sovereign ultimately becomes the exile. There is a really deep, tragic beauty to this archetype, right? It's why we're so captivated by it in history and art, and even on reality TV. We love watching someone bypass all the rules and still achieve pure greatness. We love to watch the meteor burn brilliantly across the night sky. But in all that awe, we tend to forget the basic physics involved. It always ends up as ash.
So I want to leave you with this to chew on. Think about the real cost of greatness. Do you think true masters of this chaotic left-hand path eventually have to pivot back to some form of discipline just to survive their own fire? Or is that inevitable, tragic end, the burning of the vessel, literally an inseparable necessary part of the art itself? Let that sink in.
Now available exclusively on Amazon Kindle eBooks. Rhizome Summer 2026, a collection of essays, Rhizome Fall 2026 Book 2.